Imagine this. It's night. You're sitting in the glow of a large, low fire. You are in an Anglo Saxon mead hall over 1,000 years ago. This settlement is surrounded by miles and miles of forest and fen. You're isolated. But tonight there is a rare visitor. You are listening to a story told in the deep rhythmic cadence of a seasoned scop, a traveling storyteller. He plucks at a harp, weaving a musical tapestry to accompany his words. Warriors clad in fur stare out from the shadows. The low fire flickers in their eyes, which are fixed on the storyteller. The scop's voice takes his listeners to realms of myth and legend, invoking the spirit of ancient sagas. Today he tells the story of Beowulf.
What? Wekar denne hinjer bagom thödkunninge thrumje fronon. Hoda äderlingas ellen fremmedon. Oft, skildskev, skjäderna trätta, många mig de meudo settla av ter. Jag så det ärlas. Sedan är det så att funden. I dess frovre bad, wax under våknum, värtmänden far, och att him äwilchimset den dra över rondra huran sådana. Gomban gyllen. That was good, König.
In order to understand the literature of a people, you need to understand the context of that literature. So let's briefly talk about Anglo-Saxon society, which existed from the 5th to the 11th centuries in what is now England. Anglo-Saxon society was organized into tribes or clans, each led by a chief or king. These tribes often had their own territories, and loyalty to one's tribe was crucial. Over time, the tribal structure evolved into larger political entities, kingdoms and petty kingdoms. These regions were ruled by kings, and as you probably guessed, there were a lot of conflicts and power struggles and complex webs of alliances. There was a lot of fighting. What else needs to be said? In a society where there's lots of conflict and power struggles, lots of fighting, warriors will be very important. Latin historians use the word Comitatus to describe the relationship that Anglo-Saxon warriors had with each other, and with their chief, especially after having fought together. It's a band of brothers kind of thing. Loyalty, bravery, and mutual obligations characterize this bond. Part of the Comitatus was the reciprocal relationship between the warrior and the chief. Warriors pledged loyalty and service to their chief. They were expected to fight bravely in battles, demonstrate unwavering loyalty, and even sacrifice their lives if necessary. Death in battle was seen as an honorable fate. The lord in turn was expected to be generous. He was expected to provide food and shelter, but also gifts. Warriors often received weapons and armor, usually the spoils of war, and other valuable items. Rings were of particular importance, and all these were symbols of the lord's appreciation for their service. In a nutshell, the warriors were to be loyal, and the lord was to be generous. The mead hall was the central place where these relationships were reinforced, through feasting and gift-giving. Again, band of brothers kind of stuff. The Wergild, or the man price, was a system of compensation for crimes. It was a violent world, and people were often killed. Each person had a value, and if harm was done to an individual, the responsible party had to pay a Wergild to the victim's family as restitution. One of the primary purposes of the Wergild system was to prevent blood feuds. These could go on forever and deplete the warrior pool with all the back-and-forth revenge killings. The Folkmoot was an assembly where freemen gathered to make decisions and settle disputes. The Witenagemot was a larger assembly of nobles and clergy that advised the king. Both of these institutions played a role in governance. I find it interesting that right from the very beginnings of English history, the idea of the king having absolute power wasn't really a thing. Oh, and thing was another name for Folkmoot in Norse. The economy of Anglo-Saxon society was primarily agrarian, farming, herding, and fishing, and land ownership was a key determinant of social status. Over the centuries, Anglo-Saxon society underwent Christianization. Missionaries such as Augustine of Canterbury played a major role in the conversion of Anglo-Saxons to Christianity. The synthesis of Christian and pagan elements is evident in Anglo-Saxon literature and art. Society was hierarchically structured. At the top were the kings and the nobility, followed by the freemen, and at the bottom were slaves. Social mobility was limited, and status was often inherited. The burial practices of the Anglo-Saxons were elaborate. They included the use of burial mounds, grave goods, and sometimes ship burials. These practices reflected beliefs in the afterlife and were linked to social status. So there's your snapshot of Anglo-Saxon society. It's a blend of warrior culture, tribal structures, customary laws, and evolving religious influences. So now let's talk about the literature. Anglo-Saxon literature refers to the body of literature written in Old English during the medieval period in England, roughly from the 5th century to the Norman conquest in 1066. It includes Beowulf, the Exeter Book, which is an anthology of Anglo-Saxon poetry, and the Battle of Maldon, which is an epic poem about the battle against the Vikings. Epic poems in particular were often recited or sung by scops who passed down stories from one generation to the next. In the stories that the Anglo-Saxons told, heroism is a central theme. They often featured heroic figures, such as warriors and kings, engaged in epic battles and displaying qualities of bravery, loyalty, and honor. Look no further than the story of Beowulf to make a case for this characteristic. Wyrd plays a significant role in Anglo-Saxon literature. Wyrd is usually understood as fate or destiny. The idea is that the events in one's life are predetermined. They follow a preordained course. Wyrd also conveys a sense of interconnectedness and interdependence. The actions of individuals are seen as woven into a larger cosmic tapestry, and one's fate is intertwined with the fate of others. So the choices that people make and the consequences of those choices are considered part of a larger interconnected web of existence. Wyrd implies a sense of destiny, but it doesn't necessarily imply a passive acceptance of fate. In Anglo-Saxon literature, individuals are often portrayed as having the ability to make choices, even if those choices are influenced by fate. So the tension between fate and free will is a recurring theme in Old English poetry and literature. Interestingly, the English term weird evolved from the Old English term weird, but our word has a broader meaning, like something strange or uncanny or supernatural. But it still retains its connection to fate, especially in phrases like, "That's a weird coincidence," or "a weird twist of fate." And if you heard of a guy who survived a horrific car accident, but then got hit by a bus as he left the hospital, you might say, "That was weird." The literature of this period reflects a blend of Christian and pagan influences. The shift from a Germanic polytheism to Christianity was gradual and occurring at the time the Anglo-Saxon literature was being recorded. What's more, it was often Christian scribes who were recording it. So there's this complex blending of Christian and pagan ideals and elements. So these are some of the main characteristics of Anglo-Saxon literature in general. Now we will turn to the characteristics of Anglo-Saxon verse specifically, the verse in which Beowulf was written. Anglo-Saxon verse exhibits distinct characteristics that set it apart from later English poetic forms. Let me just show you a few lines of what Anglo-Saxon verse looks like. You can see that line break in the middle of it? That's called a caesura. Caesura is a pause. On each side of the caesura is a half line, and each half line has 2 accented syllables, 2 beats. Bum bum, pause, bum bum. This is why Anglo-Saxon verse is said to have 4 stress lines. You can also see in this passage all kinds of alliteration. In the first line you can see the 3 G sounds. In line 4 you have S sounds. In the line after that there's all those M sounds, and so on. A kenning is a figurative expression or compound word used to replace a simple noun. For example, whale road for the sea, and battle sweat for blood. These characteristics collectively define the unique style and structure of Anglo-Saxon verse. They contribute to the distinctiveness of Old English poetry. So in order to illustrate how Anglo-Saxon epic verse goes, I have rewritten the story of the 3 little pigs in Anglo-Saxon verse. In a mead hall midst kin and kindred, 3 little pigs gaily giggled and goinked, then were sent away by the sickly sow. These porkers, now in want of pen, purchased the materials to make each a modest mansion. The first built his house with a fast straw flash, thinking it sturdy, but others thought not. A savage wolf then wandered their way, lurked with hunger howling in his heart. He huffed and puffed and straw was strewn, and wee went pig number 1 all the way home to the house of sticks. The wolf with a wily and wanting gut huffed and he puffed, tore the house apart. The 2 piggy brothers, both scared and frantic, sought sanctuary with their mason sibling. The 3rd pig, wise and well prepared, built a house with walls well mortared, of sturdy bricks. The structure did stand against the wolf's blow, it would not bend. The wolf, with a huff and puff anew, found the brick abode a formidable fort. The pig trio rejoiced. Their bacon was saved. The wolf went off, a bit hungry and grave. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.